And he'll probably give more of the background of how he got started in politics, but served in the military, and he'll probably, I don't know if he's going to talk about that or not, but ended up, while he was in service, becoming very convicted of running for office, and served in the Missouri legislature, served as the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee here in Missouri, which is a pretty prestigious position to be in. That's one of the committees most people like to be in because it helps control where the funds go. But he was able to see quite a bit that goes on in Missouri and legislatures all over the country that unfortunately highly unethical. And really just opened his heart up to our community, serving our community, advocating for us. Some of you have seen there's a meme that gets shared all over every once in a while. It's got a picture of Paul making a quote that he gave on the floor when our bill came up in the House a couple years ago. But just a neat quality individual. He lives in Wisconsin temporarily. We're trying to get him to move back here to Missouri and get him to run again. Don't know if we're going to be successful, but we're trying hard because we really need him back in the Missouri legislature. But just a quality individual. Please help me welcome Representative Paul Curtman. And then we've got a stand if you want. It's up to you.
Yeah. Okay. It's a real honor to be here, especially with you all with this organization, and for the mission of the organization is extremely important. It wasn't until I met Mark that I really started learning exactly kind of how deep this issue is for some people. And it also wasn't until I met Mark that I started having kind of regular meetings in Jefferson City, learning a little bit about some of the policies that are already in place, whether it's the state level or at the federal level. And in many cases, our own government is weaponized to actually destroy families even further than what they're already going through and what they're already experiencing. And I also learned that money is deeply involved. And the meme that Mark was referring to was when I stood up on the House floor and I started talking about a program by which the federal government will send matching funds to the state, and it all has to do with how a judge tells a father how much money he has to pay in child support. And when money gets involved, that's going to completely start manipulating decisions that judges make, decisions that legislatures make. Once money gets involved in the process, you can count on there being some problems, some really serious problems, because at that point, people that show up because they're concerned about their issue and the issue that other people are facing, now they have to contend with this other issue that a lot of people in government don't want to admit, and that is that they're going to make their decisions based on the money also, not just our families. And that's a very, very dangerous place for our policy to be when policy can be weaponized against families and actually put mothers and fathers and children in a very, very precarious situation that is substantially going to affect the outcome of the rest of their life and how they grow up and how they perceive their own parents. So there's a couple things that Mark asked me to talk about today. One of the things that I'm going to talk about is a little bit about my experience as a legislator, what it's like working on policy in the Capitol building. And as he said, I was the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. From one year to the next, we might have tax policy come up, and as soon as tax policy gets introduced, there are, the state comes alive. There are people on the left and the right, and they all come into Jefferson City, and they're all knocking doors, talking to legislators. And whether it's been tax policy, whether it's been other issues that I've dealt with, other bills that I've sponsored, co-sponsored, or maybe even been against, I've worked with citizen activists, and I've also had to deal and contend with professional paid lobbyists. And sometimes there's a world of difference between how professional paid lobbyists go to work and the resources that they have and things that they can do versus what citizen activists have to deal with and the resources that they can bring into a discussion. And I'll give you just a quick example. There was a bill, I think it was in 2011, it had to deal with a tax credit, and there was a lobbyist, there was somebody in St. Louis who was the recipient. His company was the recipient of just millions and millions of dollars worth of tax credits. And he would get these tax credits, and this would amount to more money in his pocket at the end of the year as long as he completed the projects he was supposed to complete for the state. And what he would do with this extra money, when somebody suddenly has extra money because of a bill that was written for them, what they will often do is use that extra money to write lots of campaign checks to people in office, because that's a way that you can get somebody's ear. And so on the professional lobby, and I'm not trying to beat up lobbyists, they're there doing a job because somebody else can't be there, right? They're hired to go work the halls of the legislature. That's what they're supposed to do. But when they also have resources and large sums of money where they can write checks, just to kind of get the ear of a legislator, invite them out to a reception, hey, we want to, make a contribution to your campaign, $500, that representative, that senator is going to show up, and they're going to spend 5 or 10 minutes talking to somebody, and sometimes it's because they know they're going to get a campaign check because yard signs cost money. So that's what they're going to do. You don't have to like it, but it's just the way it works, right? People will respond when there's money on the line, whether it's policy or whether it's a candidate who just needs funds for his campaign. On the other side of the issue, though, you have somebody they're not a paid lobbyist. They don't have all the resources of somebody that has lots of financial backing. They show up at the Capitol building because they have been affected by an issue. And all they know how to do is just knock on a door and just find somebody that they can talk to. There's good ways and bad ways to do that, though. Whether you're a citizen activist or whether or not you're a paid professional activist that we call a lobbyist. They've done research on this, and they've determined that it only takes 7 seconds for you to make a first impression with somebody, and that first impression will be a lasting impression. And the industry that I work in right now, we're often told, hey, have your elevator speech ready. In other words, you want to know what you can say to somebody, so that way if you're only on an elevator with them for 3 to 5 seconds, you can say something that's going to capture their attention, and at some point in time, even make them want to come back to you. Carry on the conversation, learn a little bit more. Or maybe whatever it was that you said interested them, or maybe it got them interested in you. Maybe they just like you. So 7 seconds. We usually only have about 7 seconds to make the first impression. And here's one thing that people have to understand about making that first impression, especially where dealing with politicians are concerned. Because it's politicians, you need that cooperation in order to actually affect changes in policy. People are going to judge you. They are going to judge you. Love it or hate it, as soon as you meet somebody, within that first 7 seconds, somebody else, the person that you're meeting, is going to make up their mind whether or not they're interested in continuing that conversation or whether or not they're looking forward to ending it. You got about 7 seconds, and people are making a judgment call on you, whether or not they like you, before you even get to any of your information. They're going to decide whether or not they care about that information, in many cases, based on whether or not they just like you. I'm going to give you a couple examples from my own experience, but probably one of the best stories I ever heard that illustrates this point. And the roles are kind of reversed here, but back in the mid-1800s, there was 2 men, they were missionaries. And they got invited, they were in England, and they got invited to the Prime Minister's house. His name was William Gladstone. And I think they went for like a prayer breakfast or something. And after the prayer breakfast, the 2 men were leaving, and one of the men said to the other, "What an honor it's been to be at Prime Minister Gladstone's house. There is no doubt in my mind that we were being treated by the most powerful and important man in all of Europe." That's what they thought. That's the impression that William Gladstone left on them. 2 years later, 2 or 4 years later, the same 2 men went to the exact same annual prayer breakfast, only this time it wasn't Prime Minister William Gladstone, it was Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. And this is so fascinating. It's a good study in people. As they were leaving that meeting, the one man said to his friend, "This has been an excellent, excellent prayer breakfast. Prime Minister Disraeli made me feel like I was the most important man in Europe." Whenever we meet somebody and we talk to them, it's going to go one way or the other. Either we're going to make them feel like they're important, or we're going to try to make them feel like we're important. Usually whenever you're negotiating policy, whenever you're trying to negotiate and manage your own influence, it's usually going to go one way or the other. And usually, the best way to begin to make that first impression is to help the person that you're talking to feel like they're important. So there's a couple things. First of all, to make a good first impression, just from my own experience, I don't know if you all have experienced this before, and some of this stuff, I don't mean to be, talking at a lower level than the people in this group. These are just some of my own observations, and probably most of you are already completely doing some of the things that I'm saying, but for some people that haven't thought about it, and it's important because there's a lot of professional politicians out there who haven't thought about this. In this very room, I was in here one time, and there was a candidate that was running for U.S. Senator. It was in this room. It was back at that door. It was at an annual dinner for the Jefferson County Republicans. And this guy's back there shaking hands with people as they're walking through the food line in this room. And when it got my turn to walk up to kind of go through the food line, this guy shook my hand, and he didn't even look me in the face. Like, he shakes my hand, he's already looking for who he's going to shake hands with next. Fatal error. That is a terrible impression. There's something about eye contact. When you make eye contact with the person that you're talking to, it does a couple things. It lets them know that you are interested in them. And that's really important when you're trying to create a bond with a legislator. Making that eye contact lets them know that they're interested in you. For that brief moment, even if you're just taking just a couple seconds to shake hands, in those few seconds, looking at them, making eye contact with them, shaking their hand, lets them know, like, hey, out of all the hundreds of people that might be in this room, right now I'm looking at you. You have my undivided attention, even if it's just for a few seconds. But that idea that they're already looking for who they can shake hands with next because they're just trying to work the room, complete turn off. Needless to say, that candidate did not get elected. I imagine he probably did that with most of the voters in the state because it can easily become a quick habit. But the second thing about making eye contact, when you look at people and when you're talking with them and when you're dealing with them, and this was a lesson that I had to learn kind of the hard way, it's important to smile. In spite of how serious the issue is, how much gravity and weight might be there, how much of a burden you carry on that issue, it is so incredibly important when you're looking at somebody and you're talking with them, just smile. And right now, we're still kind of on that phase of just making that first impression. I went to kind of a legislative policy training meeting that was being held in Des Peres back in 2012, I think it was. And I walked into the room, into the back. I wasn't doing anything there. I was actually just going there. I was just going to pick up a friend who was there and have a talk with her. There were some things that she was interested in learning about Jefferson City, and so I was going to just talk with her about it. But I walked in, and I sat in the back of the meeting, kind of waiting for one of their breaks, and I could not believe what I was hearing. This speaker that was up at the front was telling these people, if you want to be successful lobbying and advocating for policy, I'm not making this up. He said, you got to get in their face. Don't be afraid to yell and scream in their face and intimidate them and make them feel bad, make them feel ashamed, make them feel afraid for not doing what it is that you're there to do. Because those are public servants and they should have to bend over backwards for you. And you know what? Kind of in theory, that's right? Public service. People should be working for the people, right? But a lot of times, people like that who take that approach to policy, they're completely forgetting that the person that they're talking to is also a person who cares about their own dignity, and they don't want to be treated bad or disrespectful. And a lot of times we confuse our state legislators as being the same type of people that have been leading the Republican and Democrat Party in Washington, D.C. and have been there for 40 years. That is not the same type of people in Missouri. In Missouri, if you want to talk to your state representative, chances are they live less than 15 minutes away from you. In most of the districts in Missouri, your state representative, you could drive to their house. Just find out where they live, and you could be there in 15 minutes. That's how close they are because they are our neighbors. They're people that you run into at CVS and Walmart and Walgreens. Same thing with state senators, exact same thing. So this is not, when we're talking about state legislators, these are not the same type of people that you see in Washington, D.C. for 40 years. You know, they get elected without two nickels to rub together, and after 3 or 4 terms in Washington, D.C., suddenly they're millionaires, and you're like, what in the world's going on up there? That's not how things operate in Jefferson City. And so the idea that you got to go and yell and intimidate them, I immediately left when I heard that guy talking, because I was the only politician there at the time. And I was like, I don't want to be used for target practice. So I got out of there. But whenever you meet somebody and you're dealing with them, being able to just smile with them and let them know that, hey, this is not going to go the wrong way. This is going to be a friendly interaction. That's going to do a lot to help you get your foot in the door when you're trying to open up a conversation that can go a lot further. In 2015, I was on the House floor. We were debating a pretty serious topic, and my chief of staff, my legislative assistant, he came down, he got me, he said, hey, you have a constituent out here who really wants to talk to you about this issue. And one thing that I'm really glad about, I only spent 8 years in office because we have term limits here. And I decided early on that I was never going to say no to anybody. Like, anybody could come in. I was going to have that conversation with anybody. I'm not afraid of ideas. I'm not afraid of my ideas, so I'm willing to talk with anybody. So I left the House floor, I walked out into the hallway, and there was a constituent of mine who I had never met, and he didn't want to talk about the issue. He had a position on the issue, and he was just irate. We've never met before. We had never said 2 words to each other, never seen each other's faces before, but he was mad. I mean, this guy was so mad. And look, I was in the Marines between active duty and reserve for 10 years. I was a Marine Corps mixed martial arts instructor. I was an infantry squad leader. I've been deployed. Like, I know when somebody's looking to, I know when somebody's so mad that they might throw a punch, just out of their own instinct. And this guy was approaching that territory fast. And to the point where he started to curl up his hands, and he started getting a little jumpy. And he was talking and just talking. He was getting angrier and angrier. And I said, sir, I said, I'll tell you, he didn't even know what my position on the issue was. I said, I'll tell you what my position on the issue is. If you just give me a second, I'll tell you kind of what's going on right now, and maybe you can help me with the issue. I got some questions. And he just kept talking and just yelling at me right there in the hallway. And finally I said, sir, I said, we got to have a conversation here. And he said, I'm not going to have a conversation because all you politicians are just always lying through your teeth. And I said, okay. And I just turned around and I just walked away, just like that. Because I'm not afraid to walk away. Even as a public servant, I was never afraid just to walk away from somebody who was coming across the wrong way, deeply the wrong way, obviously on the wrong side of a relationship. If you want... It doesn't matter how you feel about the process. That does not matter. You have to learn to detach yourself emotionally from the issue and also from the process, and think very strategically about who it is you're going to talk to, because you want to be able to build rapport with that person really before you ever actually get to the point where you're actually having a conversation about the issue. Smile, make eye contact, and what this guy should have done, where I was concerned, as he should have just taken a minute just to listen to me also. If he wanted to have some influence, he should have just taken a minute just to hear me out and what my position was on the issue. But he was of that school of thought that if somebody's in office and if they're politicians, you just need to do what we say. It's not how it works. It should be how it works. It should be how it works that, we're represented by the people that are elected to go represent us. But when you're having a one-on-one conversation, you got to kind of throw that out the window, because you're not dealing with the whole democratic republic. You're not dealing with the whole government. You're dealing with one person. Gandhi said that first you must seek to understand and then to be understood. One of the best ways that you can begin to open up a dialogue with a legislator is introduce yourself and say, I'm here to talk about this issue. Here's an issue I'm concerned about. What do you know about the issue? Just ask them an open-ended question. In my case, coming out of the military, there was a lot of issues in the state that I wasn't too familiar with. This is one of those issues. At the time when I first had that first conversation with Mark, I didn't know anything about the issue. And so it was one of those situations where I was like, I don't really know a whole lot. What is going on with this issue? What is happening? See, when you ask somebody else to first explain their position or explain their issue, At that point, it's only right and respectful for you to also be afforded that same opportunity to explain your position on the issue. That's why Gandhi said, first seek to understand, then to be understood, because if you first seek to understand, at that point you are creating a platform by which you have an opportunity to respond so that way they can also understand you. So dealing with legislators, dealing with politicians, and really even dealing with other lobbyists. In Jefferson City and in Capitol buildings across the country, in Washington, D.C., you think you're going there just to talk about your issue. But somewhere near the end of the legislative session, your issue, if it makes it through the House and over to the Senate, for example, your issue basically essentially winds up on a chessboard of multiple issues. And there are lobbyists and politicians, everybody's trying to maneuver their issue to get out ahead of everybody else. Before the end of the session comes, they throw the gavel down and the session's over. Because when that happens, you have to start all over next year if you don't get your issue all the way across the finish line. So it's not just a matter of dealing with representatives and senators, it's also a matter of dealing with these other people that are there to work on issues. These other lobbyists, they're there to work on issues too. And if they need to push your issue off to the side as they negotiate to get their issue to the front, they'll do that. Building those relationships with lawmakers and with these professional policy influencers is extremely important. But all in all, if you want to make a good first impression, bottom line is just this. Just be nice. Be as nice as you can. And if you have an opportunity to make that introduction to a lawmaker, either in their office or maybe at a lunch or something, follow up and just say thank you. Because that hardly ever happens. And if you send a handwritten thank you card and you say, hey, I just want to thank you, this issue is really important to us, and you taking a few minutes to talk to us really means a lot. We really appreciate that, and we just want you to know how much we appreciate it. They will remember that. I think probably the handwritten notes that I got as a lawmaker over the course of 8 years, less than 0.1%. Sometimes people would send emails. Sometimes they would send emails out. They would send a form email out to all the members of their organization, and then all of a sudden I'd get like 15 or 20 form emails. Sometimes it would say at the bottom, like, insert your name here. So you know people are just kind of for it. They're not really being thoughtful about it. They think they are. They're kind of going through the motions. But it is so easy just to send a handwritten thank you note. In the world we live in today, people just don't do that kind of thing anymore.